Hey everyone, this is Sina with another episode of Into the Bytecode. My guest today is Justin Glibert, the co-founder of ZeroXSpark and Lattice. So Justin and I actually had a conversation on this podcast about 2.5 years ago when he was working on a new on-chain game, and this is the second time we're talking together. So we talk about autonomous worlds, we talk about what they mean in the context of games, but also what they mean in the context of the internet more broadly, and what it means to design for players that aren't purely rational economic agents, again in the context of the internet more broadly. So I thought this was a really thought-provoking conversation, and I hope you enjoy.
Where I'm at right now with autonomous world is I do think that we basically don't have the vocabulary nor examples to point to be able to have a proper discourse about it in the first place. I think that's really what's going on. A year or two ago, I was just, actually the essay was 2 years ago, long time.
It's 2 years ago.
It was
Wow.
2 summers ago. Yeah. I remember
Wow.
I was in New York when I wrote it. And I think that there's a lot of stuff I kind of what was going to write the part 2 of the essay. And the part 2 of the essay was about this idea of digital physics. It's an old term from physics, which is people thought that the universe might be like a computation. And physics is just kind of an emergent property of the way that computation is being carried over. And I kind of stole the term and started rebranding it around the idea of, okay, as the bits start flipping the atom, which is a little bit what's happening right now, or at least what some people are trying to push towards, we're going to have to think pretty deeply about what are the rules of the digital world. And I'm not talking in a very skeuomorphic way where you walk in a low poly metaverse, like Facebook meta style. It's just I think of Bitcoin as a part of the digital physics now. These are just rules of the universe that we're dealing with. And I don't think they're going to change that much. And if I were I don't know, a silicon intelligence, whether it's an AI or an uploaded human, I would probably want to know what the digital physics is and be deep, be very intimate about these are the things I can and I cannot do. And I do think that the thing that's really interesting with autonomous world is they give us a sandbox to start playing with these ideas, because you build a thing that is self-standing, that doesn't actually that doesn't need the outside because it's autonomous, but also because of how blockchains work, it can barely interact with the outside. I think that I find it really interesting that blockchains essentially create almost self-sealing environments. Yeah, we have stuff like stablecoin and oracles, but they're exceptions instead of the rules. You need a massive amount of effort to connect a blockchain to the external world. So they almost function as a digital airlock between our reality and another one. And so I think they were great places to start experimenting with what are the rules that, if we work backwards from a goal, either pro-social kind of interactions or extreme violence or hyper-financialization or Turing completeness, how do we work backward to what rules should be laid down? Because the closest thing we have today to this is game design, which was never meant to be done in a way to reach a specific goal beyond players' fun. That's why it's not a science. It's a vibe-based thing. It's I think players like that, so I'm going to do this. Whereas I totally think that in 20, 30 years, especially in a world where we don't have a singleton AI, but many, many different ones, I think we're going to start seeing things that are more and more going towards that direction. Because what the internet is right now is just a soup. The only thing in the digital physics of the internet is I can send encrypted TCP/IP packets to different nodes, and that's about it. And I can't go everything else is built. Every rules on top of that is defined by basically big tech, and big tech's rules are incompatible with each other. Facebook's rules are different from Google's rules. So what should be the digital physics of the digital world that gets us to either have a world where we can have plural AIs living together, or a world where I think actually, okay, I'm going to start speculating a bit, but I think one of the issue with blockchain, which is people don't know how to think about machines, and this whole cyber problem is so big, is because we've not thought enough about what the rules should be. Because we start from an assumption, almost an axiomatic assumption, which is every agent is a human. And when that gets broken in 2 minutes, we're oh man, it's not working the way I expected. So yeah, I think that was one of the intuition I had, and I've only been able to express it better recently, which is because blockchains create these digital airlocks, because they're so good at creating ecosystem from nothing where people are interested in them, either for like a financial outcome or because it's just like a big nerd snipe, it would be a natural breeding ground for like playing with these rules. But what actually happened is people have been trying to make fun games on chain. And so this whole idea of digital physics, rightfully so, got kind of like killed and deprioritized with like, how do we make things that actually have retention for people? Because that's the stage we're at. We're trying to build video games on the blockchain. We're not trying to build like virtual worlds that are not meant to be fun, that are meant, because we look at virtual worlds for who, you know, like we don't have AIs that live like autonomously on the internet yet. We don't have like humans. Like actually, I would say the crypto people are some of the only people where most of their life and their asset exist in a digital world. Like most other people are not like that. So I think the idea was a bit premature. That's like the big TLDR is I think the idea was premature. I'm humbled by the fact that it got people to stretch their thinking and be like, okay, you know, like let's think more expensively about what we're building. In general, it just drew a lot of attention to on-chain games and like stuff like and that alongside with like some of the software that Lattice built, some of the software that other people in the ecosystem built, got people to be able to make these things in like months instead of years. So net, I think it was good. But I think this is the kind of ideas where like in 5 years, I'm just going to necromance it back into the present. I'm going to be like, it's time to dig this back up. You know, there's some good ideas there.
Yeah. So autonomous worlds, at least the way, you know, the kind of smaller way of interpreting it is that we have blockchains, which by default are kind of these like siloed, air-gapped environments. And the simplest thing to start building on them is games. And in these games, we can have, you know, rule sets. We can have digital physics that are not, you know, the, you know, big digital physics that govern the internet, but are like small digital physics for this world. And this is what folks have been working on because it's just kind of where we are. But the way, like the bigger way that you've been thinking about this idea is that it's more about defining the rules of interaction for the internet, like for agents, whether they're humans or AIs or anything else on the internet more broadly. And right now, the way this works is that, you know, what you said about TCP/IP is like, it's basically a, you know, completely impartial, ambivalent, networking layer, data layer.
Right. It's just message passing. That's what the internet is. Just message passing, nothing else.
So the rules are basically on the open internet, there's no rules whatsoever. And then as you enter the kind of walled garden of a server mediated by you calling into their servers, you know, reading and writing to their database, they impose these rules. But you're kind of envisioning this like rule set that's sitting between all of these entities. Like what does that look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think to illustrate, like basically today, I think it would not be controversial to say that the rules of the internet are it's basically like there's TCP/IP, right? Like it's a message passing layer. And then what has reached a sufficient amount of legibility that people are not going to question it anymore. And it's things like DNS, like there somehow happens to be like a stateful human readable system and everyone just accept it. And we accept that they have to pay for it, which is kind of wild to me. Like nobody's like, oh yeah, it's okay. So I have this like little bit of a soundbite, which is, you know, something has become a physics when nobody complains about it. It would be like if someone died from falling from a high place, you wouldn't have people in the street protesting against the law of gravity, being like, we got to change the constant of gravity. You know, it's just like it's killing so many people. No, because physics has like infinite legibility and legitimacy. Like everybody knows what it is in some intuitive way, even if they don't really know necessarily like the partial differential equations that govern physics. And it has ultimate legitimacy because you don't like say, oh, I want to change the physics, right? So I think that DNS has reached that level. In some ways, Bitcoin has as well. And I'd say like Ethereum is getting to that point as well, especially with like, you know, like the ETFs approved and all of that. I think that what the ETF shows is that, yeah, like Ethereum is a law of physics the same way like gold is. You know, it's just a thing that exists. It's not like it can't be changed. It's just like this kind of like, I mean, the thing is like Bitcoin and Ethereum kind of defy this a little bit because there's this like whole like nebulous core developer process that changes the rules of physics. And I think this is something we're going to really have to figure out at some point because that's where the Bitcoiner are correct in some ways. Like you cannot just change physics every 6 months and expect it's going to be fine. Like at some point, you're going to have huge problems. So that's where we're at physics-wise. But okay, so you have these walled gardens. What like as you said, like as soon as I enter like a server, I basically have to kind of like respect the rules they're giving me. Those rules are changing. But I don't think that's necessarily the big problem. Like I think business are pretty like incentivized to like screw things up totally. The one thing though is I think that if you can change the rules of physics at will and you combine that with capitalism, what you get is basically you make theme parks. You build a place that people want to come to, and the rules are like basically like made such that people want to stick around and do things, but they're not there for like other people to thrive within your environment, right? Like if there was like an entity that was controlling the rules of the universe, it would look more like Disneyland than it is right now. Or maybe it is already Disneyland and we have like enlightened beings on top that are just like really excited about us figuring out how to build a Dyson sphere. But like I'm pretty sure if it was like a normal human, like it would not look like this. It would be like, oh yeah, you know, you can do this and you can do that, and here's like a shortcut you can take, and there's this fun ride you can do. It seems like there's a natural tendency towards like what we want at the end of the day is we want to retain people into our system. We want to get them happy, but also we don't want to like. There's a lot of stuff we could let them do, but it's not good for us to do it because either we would lose money or we would create competitors, or just like we don't have the engineering resource to do it. Like if I could build inside Google, which you can kind of start doing with like things like, you know, OAuth, and I can let people log in with Google, but it's very small. It's a very small surface area, right? Because it would be like a lot of work for them to like let us build inside their kingdom. So there is some intuition there that the universe is pretty good because it kind of like makes sure that like really catastrophic things cannot happen. Like I cannot snap my finger and like instantiate a nuclear bomb. Maybe I'll be able to. Like there's nothing from physics that prevent me from doing this right now. But it seems that there's some like overall law of like complex system that makes that really hard. You know, like there is some stuff going on there, like making things that are powerful seem very difficult. Like I think it's kind of neat, you know, that like there's no shortcut where like, oh, you and I can just like in a garage figure out infinite energy. That's just like some sci-fi stuff. It seems like everything that's powerful is really hard to do as well. So I don't know. This is kind of like there's this kind of like intellectual space that like sometimes like I find people are like interested in, and that's where it stands. But I don't think there's a clear outcome yet, which is like, okay, I think this is how the rules of the internet should be. I think this is how like people should be able to this is how we should let people build inside like these walled gardens. I think it's very unclear right now. And also the problem with computers is they always go towards generalization and just being like able to do everything, because this is the natural path we're taking. Like we're not going to make like digital systems that are just like we're not going to make digital systems that slow us down. That just goes against the incentives. So that's why I feel like Bitcoin and Ethereum, if you think about the manifold of things that are on the internet that could plausibly go towards a physics, it's kind of incredible that they became part of the physics of the internet. Because I feel like they're like not local maximas. You kind of have to like quantum teleport there. Because how do you get people to like inherently buy into limitation? Because there's a limitation behind these systems that you have to buy into in order to like get them, in order to get to use them, but also in order to get them to be like physics of the internet. So there's some like weird, like if you basically do basic hill climbing, I don't think you get to Ethereum or Bitcoin. That's why like if you look at Ethereum and Bitcoin, they could have been built with cryptography and computer science from like 20 years ago. It's just ECDSA and like hashes, right? That's why they're so surprising and incredible. Actually more than 20 years ago, probably 30. I'll stop there. But there's this sense that like in order to get better physics or just physics in any way, I don't think we can do incremental improvement over what we have, because if we do incremental improvement over what we have, we just get towards like more and more general systems that have better kind of like engineering metrics, more hardware, faster network, you know, like bigger distributed database. This is all that we're doing. You know, we're just like, we're not taking a step into, no, let's make the system restricted so it's like better at having different kind of people use it. That's what blockchains did. And it was like so weird as a path to take compared to what like an L6 engineers at Google does, which is like building Google Spanner so we can have a bigger database. Why make the database slower? This doesn't compute. So there's something weird where like it almost feels like building physics goes against the current grain of what like just like regular.
So there's something about constraints, even though it seems like they limit what each of the players can do in the short term, actually allows these moves to kind of like fit into each other and explore new regions of the map that even though they were technically available beforehand, like the inertia of how things would play out would never go there. Another example that I'm just thinking of is I recently watched Hamilton, the Broadway show, and it kind of got me more curious about the American Revolution and the founding of the United States as a country. And it's another one of these things, just reading more about how this came about. It's another one of these, like, almost like digital physics level things, which we take it for granted now, that like the kind of setup of this country, of government, of economics that we live in. But it was, there were a lot of early intentional decisions that there was debate around, right? Like how does the, judiciary enforce laws? Does this happen at the level of the states? Does it happen at the level of like the federal government? How do these things interface with each other? And there's a way in which like the people designing those things, were kind of thinking about which one of these configurations would be most onward leading. But I guess so this begs the next question, which is, you were talking about theme parks versus worlds, and how the kind of like easy kind of objective functions to opt into are, you know people keeps like sustaining itself, and people are like happy, or like it makes money. Like what do you think our objective functions should be? And this is maybe where, but if we are designing a digital physics for the internet, right, which is using Bitcoin and Ethereum and cryptography and other stuff, like what are the things we want to be true? Like what are the
Mhm.
properties we want that physics to have?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's when it becomes political. I think that the thing with how the internet is going right now is it's basically almost apolitical, apart from the fact that it's just generally techno optimist. Like people are not like I don't think it's a political statement to say, oh, like we need more bits flowing, right? Like you can lay down more like cables in the ocean, and people are fine with that in many ways. Like maybe there's like environmental aspects and all of it, but if you just told people like you can press the button and you get more bits, everybody would like, that's a pretty safe thing to do. Like you're not going to find many people that are like against that. And I think that's why it's going in that direction, is because any other like strong opinions start becoming political. Like Bitcoin is political, Ethereum is less, but it's still political in so many ways, right? Like the fact that actually you start erasing a lot of the modes of stateful system. Now that you have smart contracts, things that used to be natural mode, which is state, like, oh, I have state that can protect, like state from a computer science perspective, not state from a like a geopolitical perspective. And so I think here, yeah, like that decision would be a little bit political.
What do you mean by political?
As in, I think it flows from some opinions around like how, like, this is what, like, this is, it would depend on how you want humans to live together, right?
Right.
And so, as an example, here's a very libertarian kind of digital physics, almost like extremely libertarian. An extremely libertarian kind of digital physics is my footprint on the internet, whether it's the state I have, so my data, but also my interaction with others, my money, my capital, my computation, all of it is basically like bulletproof. It's the equivalent, if you're in this like real universe, it's the equivalent of like you're Sina, you're like just fed up with all of this. What you do is you go on a spaceship that flies away from Earth at the speed of light, and there's literally nothing we can do to you. Like physics literally prevent us from doing anything to you. So the equivalent of like that on the internet is like I'm completely locked up, such that if I decide not to interact, nobody can do anything to me, right? And I would say that is political, because if you think about not like what is one kind of violence, quote unquote, that exists today, it's taxation, right? It's like the state can take money from you and they don't have to respect any laws or whatever. It's just, I mean, it's the law, they can take money from you. And in many ways, like I think there's a case to be made that it's a good thing for like many different systems, right? But that's political in its nature. Like some people are like, I don't want that. So I think that the issue we have right now with this whole like, and I think it's going to become more and more important with AI essentially being deployed at scale, is that for as long as we will not decide to be political about how the internet should go, we're going to remain in this like safe choices, more compute, more bandwidth, etc. And then what you can do now is, if you're an entity that operate there, you can just like extend your tentacles through that and actually define yourself politically what you think the internet should be, which is what's currently happening. Like the giga aggregators, what they're doing is they're defining what the physics should be, because there's no underlying thing. There's a vacuum that is being created in many ways. So, and the thing I find interesting is the reason why we were able to start with money with blockchains is because regardless of their scale and the amount, like how much like people trust them, I don't think any private company in the West could realistically create its own currency on the internet. I think that's the experiment that has been basically played out. And so there was this like almost like impossibility results where you cannot reach a threshold of trust where you can do that. And so blockchains were able to start there because they were able to like leapfrog that. But now they have to work down the stack. Like there's a ton of stuff today where like we trust some companies to do it, but they have to like be pretty big and they have to like get a lot, like accumulate a lot of trust, right, in order to be able to do that and like essentially build a lot of like unfair advantages, like licensing agreements between different people and all of that. And I think that's where blockchain should go down the stack in some ways, because they can compete at that level. The thing is, I am not sure currently you can like say with a straight face they can compete on exactly the same metrics. And you'd be like, okay, I'm like a consumer and I'm going to like switch from X to Y. And this other thing is like based on the digital physics of the internet. And it's exactly the same. Like it's as good as it was. So I think that's one of the main issue, which is like, you have to be a little bit political, but the blockchain people, like I'm going to make a lot of generalization, right? It's of course like way more complicated than I'm drawing it right now. But I think a lot of the blockchain folks, there's a little bit of like an island politically of what they think is important, both from an upside creation perspective and a downside prevention perspective. So you need to essentially create more of a spectrum of like, here's, depending on what you care about, here's how you can segment the internet from a digital physics perspective. Like, what does the internet look like if it's more like the world map right now than it is? And it's a scary thing to say. Like, we look at the internet being like, man, that was such a great feat of like humanity. We all got on the same network and all of that. But the truth is, it's not. Like, China has the global firewall. They just broke the physics. And everybody's like, okay, that was not very nice of you, but just like, you can do that, right? And there's a bunch of other stuff that happens all the time because we got like, it's I think a little bit naive to think that this system actually like unifies and like applies globally across like every kind of like different opinions that people have about how humans should live together. And I think that the problem is that we had this message passing thing and then we stopped there. We're like, cool, now private companies take it from there, build stuff on top. And so maybe we need to, I don't know, maybe there's going to be an equivalent to the founding fathers of America drawing a line on the internet, which is like, this is the constitution of that part. And these are the rules we respect.
Yeah. Into the Bytecode is sponsored by Optimism. The Optimism Collective is building the open source modular software project known as the OP Stack, which allows developers to run layer 2 blockchains, while also addressing key governance and economic challenges in the wider ecosystem. Optimism is also leading decentralized grants experiments, like retroactive public goods funding, which recently granted 10 million OP to projects across developer tooling, infrastructure, and education. More recently, they had a major milestone by adding Coinbase's blockchain Base to also be governed by Optimism governance, and also contribute a portion of their sequencer revenues back to the collective. I've known the Optimism team for many years and know that they're dedicated to both scaling Ethereum and extending its ability to build better economic structures. So, if you're interested in learning more, whether you want to build something new or you want to apply for grant funding, then I encourage you to check out Optimism at optimism.io.
One realm where this applies that I've been thinking more about recently is around social networks. And it's kind of a classic one where you can look at, say, something like X and see that pre-Elon, it was, it had a certain political viewpoint that it was like enforcing on its domain. And now the person basically owning that company's political viewpoints changed, and that and they have this kind of more market driven free speech like mentality. But then you also look at it and you're like, okay, there's other problems with this. It's like censoring links out to the internet. It's like defining the feed. Like, there's a bunch of stuff. And so the kind of classic crypto response to that could be, let's build this like global,
Yeah.
unified protocol
Mm-hmm.
that is a that where each user owns all of their data, unilaterally decides that they can write things to this network, and that everyone else sees it. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
basically go to the other end of the
Extreme. Yeah.
spectrum,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is like the max libertarian, max individual agency. And I intuitively like that, like, I'm like, okay, I think individual agency is a good thing. But then as you start thinking about it more, you're like, is a world where each individual has max agency and autonomy the best world, or do we need to constrain it in some way? And like, if we don't, it's like, this is the purpose of like laws, it's like we have these systems that constrain our freedoms, and like we all kind of opt into them. So I feel like they could actually be this social networks could be this interesting use case where maybe the bottom layer, the protocol, like where do you draw these lines? Maybe there's this shared data layer, but then above that, like in the products that people use, these products can choose to kind of interoperate and hold like certain standards and basically ignore certain things that are happening in the protocol layer. There's this kind of like negotiation. Basically, we're kind of turning the digital physics from being, single player, defined by a single company, into things that are more like coalitional.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. And I think that's what Mastodon, I mean, has historically tried to do, which is like you have ActivityPub, like all the messages are flowing, but each Mastodon instance, federated instance decides, okay, I'm showing this up, I'm censoring this down. And I don't think it's perfect, but I think there's definitely something there. And then what you would do is you would say, hey, people vote with their packets, like instead of voting with their feet, I'm like, oh, I enjoyed this thing, I'm there and I'm like supporting that. That's a possibility, but I think it's a very astute observation from you, which is like what we're doing often is like we swing the pendulum back the other side. We let people decide everything. We just like let them have like complete ownership over their data, and that's when you start questioning like, okay, so one thing I've been thinking a lot about is like, do we need violence on the internet? Because the great thing with violence is that if people are all like if the difference in terms of like how much essentially damage it can create between me and you, or like me and like the most powerful person in the world, is only bounded by like a few orders of magnitude, that means that the masses can self-organize and dislodge themselves from oppression, which is how they've been doing it. And I think that there are plenty of examples where people did got themselves out of oppression from like having like no violence whatsoever, and that's laudable. But there's still this almost like this backdoor in physics, which is I could just like go and break shit up. And the problem is that doesn't exist currently on the internet. Like there's just nothing you can do. You can't go on the walls and like start like, like spray painting, like fuck the government. You just can't do that. And so there's an interesting thing, which is like how much do you want to put essentially in this digital physics or in these protocols that allow the masses to essentially like organize, even if they're completely destitute, in order to either like kill state, kill programs, change stuff. Because right now what programs are, what like data and computation is on the internet, both because of how it's designed and also weirdly because of cryptography, you can just like protect things the same way you would protect yourself by flying away from Earth at the speed of light. So there's these weird asymmetries, right? Like how do we empower people? Because the way we think about empowerment right now is empowerment through defense. It's like you have all of your data. You can, if nobody can censor you, it's your data. You can like, and people can decide how they build their feeds, so they can even like go fetch data from people that are like historically censored. But one thing I've been thinking about is like, how do you empower people through attack? The problem is like, if you try to do this without having some sort of digital physics on the internet, there's no real way of attacking a digital system apart from essentially trying to find exploits in it. Right? Like, and that's something that like gets very gnarly because exploits are very asymmetric as well. Like one person with an exploit is like extremely powerful compared to like a million people without an exploit. So it's almost as like when you start thinking a little bit more about this, you're like, okay, is this just like social governance? Is this just democracy? Is this what it is? Is democracy essentially like the backdoor out of some of these kind of like systems if enough people want to change? but it's a little bit unclear. I wonder what you think about this, right? Like when you go on that line of thoughts, like where do you see violence fitting in, basically? And then also, violence is a very kind of like polarizing word. You have to take it with a little bit of an open mind, because I mean, I'm not for like actually people suffering. I don't think that's a great. But it has been like surprisingly useful in history for like a bunch of different cases. Where like, oh, okay, like turns out we can self-organize, and we have that leverage. Even if you don't exert violence, you have that leverage that always exists in weird ways.
Yeah.
A totally different perspective I'll give over 2 minutes, which I think the existence of violence makes collaboration be more meaningful. Because if we live in a world where like actually we are a threat to each other all the time, the value of collaboration and peace has a totally different level of emotion, like emotional level, than like, oh, we're peaceful, but we can't do anything to each other anyway, right? Which is kind of like the de facto place, like classic libertarianism on the internet is pushing, which is like, there's no way to hurt each other. Like I can't steal your Bitcoins anyway, you know? So it's not a statement of trust from me if I'm not stealing your Bitcoins, because I couldn't anyway, right? Maybe if like each private key, maybe there's the purge with Bitcoin and each private key is visible for a day, and actually would realize that people you thought were your friends would just steal your stuff, because we never like stress tested these systems. So
Yeah.
I'll stop there.
One example of quote unquote violence in the physical world that I experienced a couple of days ago, which was really interesting, was with this airline in Canada, WestJet, which is, one of the top, it's one of the main airlines. And, Canada Day is close to 4th of July is July 1st, which is this big weekend that everyone travels around Canada. It's like the biggest travel weekend of the year. And I was flying back to Canada like on July 1st. And basically, there's this union of technicians who repair airline, like the airplanes. Like there's like 800 people who are part of this union. It's like pretty small. And this union had been trying to negotiate their wages with WestJet, and basically they couldn't reach a resolution, and they went on strike the day before this weekend started. And I haven't checked, but as of yesterday, as of 2 days ago, they were still on strike, like 3 days in. And like 80% of the flights over this weekend had been canceled because of it. Like more than 100,000 people had missed, their long weekend travel plans because this union is like trying to negotiate. And it was, I don't know, it was like a very interesting example of like game theory, like using like the asymmetric like power that you have with this opening of this weekend to kind of like use this leverage against this much bigger player. I don't know the merits of their cause or anything like that, but it was like an example of violence and of like making basically like you're also inflicting a lot of pain on all of these like bystanders, on all of these like people who are going to travel in the service of you achieving this thing. So the morality of it is like also, questionable, but that's where the leverage comes from.
Yeah, I think it's actually a great example. Strikes are a form of violence because you essentially go out of the rules of markets. You're incentivized to show up to work every day because otherwise you get fired. But here you actually like stray out of the rules, and through the power you get and the asymmetry, you can like actually sometimes get yourself out of situations where like, I mean, as we said, I don't know also like how valid like this whole thing is from their perspective. And it's probably like a multi-dimensional thing anyway, but it's a very interesting example, right? Like basically, how would you strike on the internet today? There's not much you can do. Maybe
the best example I can think of is like this ability to exit, right? That's like basically the best version of this that we have. And I feel that ability to exit is technically always there. Like I have the ability to, like I can opt out of X and like build another social network and get everyone else to move over. But activation energy and the switching cost is insanely high.
Yeah.
And one way to kind of look at what blockchain systems are enabling is that by lowering that activation energy, because the
Yeah.
data is like not sitting inside this company, it just makes it easier to switch over. And that threat of exit is what keeps, it keeps people in check. So I don't know. What do you think of that?
I think that's a good point, and that's correct. I think it's as I was saying earlier, like you don't have to enact your leverage, right? You don't have to actually use it. It just has to be real and understood by enough people that now it starts twisting essentially like people's behavior. It's like, okay, I always have to like keep this in mind that like users can leave whenever. And so I kind of like start doing the classic big tech playbook, which is like get the users in, get the advertisers in, exploit the users, and then exploit the advertisers, like in this order. I think Amazon is like a great example of this, where they're at the stage where they copy their sellers and bring their products into Amazon Basics because they've just gone through the full playbook and they're like in terminal stage of just like exploiting every single part of the marketplace to just make more money. So I do think that the right to exit probably like changes that dynamic. I wonder if like this is a complete theory, like if the right to exit actually generalized over everything else, this would be probably like a pretty interesting thing to like start looking deeper into. But like, and I think that, if like the two of us together were to like have to put together a symposium on digital physics, this would be probably one of the things we would talk about, which is we would introduce this problem and be like, okay, does this generalize over every single type of action you could take that would like be quote unquote categorized as violence on a digital system? Or are there actually other branches that are either undiscovered or underexplored that would create a complete theory of it? Because I do think that as the bit flips the atom, and I don't think the bit is going to flip the atom everywhere. I very much believe that we're still like a physicalist society. Like for as long as Instagram is going to have pictures of real people, we'll be fine. If we start having pictures of like other things, like things that exist only in the digital world, the flipping is going to start happening. But like, I mean, it would be a signal. I'm partially joking, but I'm like, I like the fact that most of the internet is still real people doing stuff, and pictures of the real world and videos of the real world and text from like real flesh humans. But yeah, as like in some parts the bit is starting to flip the atom, I think we're going to have to start thinking a little more and more deeply about it. And where I'm dissatisfied with the state of the discourse is I think the kind of like common denominator of like blockchain discourse is just like make everything libertarian and just solve the problem, right? And like the common discourse of things like local first and Mastodon, which is this other kind of like community on the internet that is also going towards decentralization, is not as libertarian as the blockchain crowd, but it's still like, keep your data, prevent other computers from preventing you from working, which is what the local first is. Like, I think their motto is like, no computers being offline should prevent you from working, right? Which is really kind of like the core of their thesis. And I think that it's still a vastly underexplored like space in general, right? Like, and there might be like a very simple primitive that could get us to go to really like that could give us like a lot of progress. What's the law of gravity and of classical mechanics for the internet that would give us more stuff? We don't need to go all the way to like crazy quantum stuff. We just need like a bunch of simple things, and like that will be able to get us to a place where like you can get stuff like the WestJet strike, whether it's good or bad, because at the end of the day, like that gave a group of humans that has been historically under leveraged a way for them to get what they want, and essentially for people to recognize their worth in this kind of like value chain that is airlines. So yeah, but I mean, it's opinion weakly held. I think that overall it's very unclear. It's very, very unclear, and maybe the libertarians are right, or maybe we will not be able to rally behind a single rule, and so the internet will remain a message passing thing. And then it's going to be more like what we were talking about earlier, which is the founding father of like a digital nation in some ways will be like, this is the rules we abide by. People are free to visit and exit because we have this like neutral message passing thing. But if you're within these lands, this is the rules that we abide by.
Mm-hmm. Do you, if you were to just kind of like sketch out like an impressionistic and imprecise painting of like what this space might look like if we have crypto people with the blockchain that allows us to define these rules, and libertarian digital physics we have the local first people. What are the alternatives, and then what are the tools we would use to actually like bring this to reality?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think the way you start figuring out what it's going to look like, or at least the way I would do it, is I would look at, okay, where are frontier technologies happening? Because they will generally generate discourse, and people will want to have like some opinions about it. So another, like, the elephant in the room is AI, right? Like, outside of like this like little world we're in, a bunch of people are essentially reaching the conclusion that we need essentially like some amount of citizen involvement in defining what these AI models like do and don't, because the truth is that this whole like post-training thing, like you start from like a foundation model that essentially can parrot the whole internet and can essentially represent like any form of like human discourse. And then you do post-training on top, which is like reinforced learning with human feedback. Like, there's tons of different techniques. What this does is it essentially ascribes some amount of like political affiliation to, it's not just political affiliation, it's like any form of like philosophy or like kind of like question that is not like, that cannot be like resolved by like reason alone, is ascribed to these models. And the way that's been done right now is just like other companies that build these models just decide whatever is most useful for people in a way that is like very obscure, right? And so there's a bunch of efforts out there from various organizations to either like get like citizen feedback the same way you would if you were to do a referendum, to kind of like decide, okay, like what do we actually want in these models? And the reason they do that is for two reasons. A, people are going to consume that model, so just out of like wanting to be closer to who their users is going to be. But I think the second one is technically the same way, like environmentalist people have pushed the idea that everybody owns the earth and we're all responsible for it. And also like you cannot have someone like unilaterally reaping the fruits of like earth without paying it forward. I think we all own the internet in some ways. And like we have all contributed in this wealth being created. So we should have a say on how the system should be deployed. And I think this is where these people are coming from. And it's still very early. I don't think any big frontier model so far received like citizen input on how the post-training should be carried out. But I think it should definitely be a pin on the map. The local first, activity pub, kind of like federated social network people is a different one. The blockchain people is a third one. I think an interesting other thing that is largely happening under our feet that we don't realize is the internet is constantly fighting for its standards. You can go to any like IETF conference and see people arguing about how TLS v1.3 should be and be like, whoa, there's actually like many different opinions there. And I used to think that it's actually not that important. Like these discussions are not that important because it should, of course, be about small things like, does your browser like recognize this new CSS tag or something like that? But actually, there's like very consequential decisions still being taken today. Here's an example. So when transport layer security got pushed out, which is this idea of like secure internet, like I can talk to like a server with my browser and the connection is encrypted. The first design of TLS had attribution. What this means is that like if I talk to Google, I can actually prove cryptographically that that packet came from Google or it came from me. But then a bunch of people were like, wait, we do not want attribution. We're okay having two computers talk to each other in a way that is secure, but we don't want things to come out of that security and then to be attributable to either computer. Because if it's unattributed, if I talk to Google and Google send me some weird stuff, I can never be like, look at what they sent me. It's actually impossible to know whether it came from me or from them. So that was a very political decision that got made and it got pushed and it got put into TLS. And now TLS is the way it is because of that discourse. And this could change in future version, but that has like massive ramification on like the game theory of a lot of stuff that happens on the internet today. So I think that even at the very base layer of our digital infrastructure, there are still decisions that are being made that can have like drastic impact there. So that's would be something we should probably involve in a little symposium, get some of the IETF people to tell us about the latest drama. But I think your question was more about like, what would this world look like from the perspective of systems being deployed? And that's where, honestly, I went through a phase of thinking that we could put the whole internet on the blockchain. I think I'm not sure anymore. I think it's not a technology problem, basically. I think that a lot of people are like, okay, we're going to scale blockchain, we're going to put the whole internet on the blockchain. I think it's more a problem about monolith and like homogeneity versus heterogeneous systems. I think the internet is really incredible because at the end of the day, it's a network of networks. there's about 4,000 different autonomous systems that are talking with each other, like ISPs, big tech companies, nation states, and it works because it's heterogeneous. Like you would not have been able to reach the entire globe if you had a monolithic network that like had a single way of doing things. It's a miracle that we were able to agree on TCP/IP. Like that was a point where we had to agree. The problem with blockchains is that the agreement is way more deeply political than agreeing about TCP/IP. Like if TCP/IP is the kind of stuff we can agree at like a civilizational level, we have to look honestly at like, okay, what did we reach agreement on at a civilizational level, and what are the kind of assumptions that were baked into these protocols, And the problem is, I think things like Bitcoin and Ethereum are too opinionated to really reach across borders, and it doesn't mean that these systems are going to be useless. I think that where we're heading towards is some form of like big heterogeneous thing. But currently, the problem with the current blockchain design is that they're like totalizing in their framework. It's like everything has to be on it for it to be working well and useful. And interfaces with other systems essentially like creates very, very, very like down to earth things like worse developer experience, worse security, worse user experience. And so when you introduce a system that is totalizing, the bet you have to make is that you can get the system to grow to the whole, to everything, essentially. It has to like ingest everything over time and like replace all existing use cases. So I think I have a little bit of a more nuanced understanding now, or like not understanding, but opinion. But I think we're still going to get many, many surprises in the next few years. One thing I'm really excited about is I do think that cryptography at the end of the day is going to be probably a glue layer between many different kinds of systems, and almost like as an interoperability tool, both between things like, TLS, like all the way down to like, I want to be able to prove something that Google sent me, to importing an Ethereum cryptography can be a glue between many of these different systems. But I think that as an engineer, it's always too compelling to look at it from a technology perspective. Like, what are we missing to make this whole thing work? I think there is a big kind of like for as long as people won't be able to say, like, if you ask them, what is the politics of Ethereum? You're not in a good place. Like, if you ask any American, what is America? They'll be able to tell you a pretty good thing. Like at the end of the day, they're pretty aligned on like what the values of the United States are. But we don't really have that for our digital systems. And it's a bit strange, I think. It's a bit strange that you do not know what you're buying into when you use them and like what they're representing from like a place of like what are the values they represent.
Into the Bytecode is sponsored by Privy. One of the biggest problems we're grappling with as builders working on crypto-enabled applications is how to make the right trade-offs between user experience on the one hand and security and privacy on the other hand. How do we promote self-custody and ownership while letting the application shine rather than the crypto behind it? So Privy plays an important role here. They provide simple onboarding so anyone can connect to your app easily, by allowing them to sign in with an existing wallet, or by making it easy for you to provision a new self-custodial wallet for them, linking to social logins like Google, Twitter, or Discord. I personally have faith in Privy because of the team. Henry Stern, who's one of the co-founders, was previously on an episode of this podcast, so you can listen to that conversation for more of a deep dive. And he and his partner, Asta Lee, have been thinking about data privacy and security for a long, long time. And you can see this in the level of thought they're putting into the product. So if you're working on a new product and thinking about how to reach a wider group of users without compromising on either user experience or privacy and security, then I encourage you to check out Privy at privy.io.
Yeah. So you're kind of questioning because one way to talk about what Ethereum is that it's like an impartial, valueless system for implementing worlds with values, right? But you're saying that underneath that there's a value system that you're opting into, which is what? Which is that these systems are kind of able to run autonomously without anyone from the outside reaching into them. Why does something like Ethereum as a rule set not have political in a way that limits how widely kind of accepted it will become?
I think it's one of the big questions. I don't think I'm going to give necessarily like a complete answer. And it's also going to be tainted by like what I'm currently thinking about. It changes every 6 months, right? But I think the key insight is that, or the key prompt is the one you just gave, which is like, okay, so what Ethereum defines, and we'll abstract like the monetary policy of Ethereum. Like, let's just like define clearly what the system gives, which is like, you have programs that run autonomously, right? That anyone can access and call and query data from. So the prompt is this more like the internet, which is just like a message passing layer, and it's probably like it's possible that everybody can accept that? Or is this more like a very opinionated system, like, you know, X under Musk versus X under the previous leadership? I don't know. I think, as an example, programs being autonomous is a little bit of I don't think you can go around and like say with a straight face to everybody in the world that program being autonomous is a good thing or a bad thing. Like, I don't think you can describe yet whether this is like a correct by construction. Like,
but you could implement levels of, you know, non-autonomy on top of that, right? You could have like various governance systems and escape hatches and things like that.
Exactly. And I think that's like the usual kind of like argument for Ethereum is, yeah, you start from something that is like autonomous and immutable and whatever, but then you can selectively reduce these guarantees to get to a place where like people would accept it. And then because of market dynamics, people are going to vote essentially through their usage to vote for systems that match what they care about, right? Maybe between, I don't know, a swapping system that is governed by the people in the world versus a swapping system that is not. If people use more of the former, then they're essentially voting on what kind of like digital physics they believe in. The issue, I think, with this statement is that the place you start from creates a path dependency on what gets discovered and what gets worked on. And I think that's like, in one clear example of this is the fact that blockchain started from a place of like, okay, we're creating a digital currency, and also we have this market for everything. And the reason we have a market for everything is because we're starting from the place that every peer is untrusted and potentially adversarial. This is why we need to have all of these systems. I think that while like this is probably general, and you probably can like reduce that in different ways, you know, like some of the roll-up people will tell you, yeah, but we can build a roll-up where every human has like one vote and X amount of gas per month or whatever. I do think that there's a path dependency on the system. And so you start from a place, and so this is going to influence the decisions that are being made around it, how people think about it. A very basic thing is the issue with transaction fees, regardless of how low they are, in my opinion, is that people always think in terms of ROI. It's like, is it worth for me to spend 1 cent on this? Whereas like if they were all bundled into like, I'm paying for like America Online, you know, like 20 years ago for like $50 a month. I don't really care if like I refresh this forums like 100 times versus 10, because it's all bundled into this thing. And it's a very like basic psychological thing that happens in that system. And while I don't think I have like a taxonomy of all of them, I do think that it would be strange that like the place we start from doesn't influence where it gets to. So that would be a thing, right? And I think some of the issues that we're seeing in blockchain from like an adoption perspective, a hyper-financialization perspective, and all of that stems from where we're coming from and what primitives have been exposed. I think so. One soundbite I have as well there is like, it might seem like it almost seems like blockchain should have been invented last. Like we should have been doing like way more stuff with like distributed system and cryptography and like being able to build all of these things with like various kinds of like autonomy and privacy. And there would still be a few problems we wouldn't be able to solve. And we'll be like, oh, okay, that's the last primitive, you know, that's the last thing we built and it's there. But weirdly, we built it super early. Like it's strange that we got blockchains before we got like ZK snarks in production, in my opinion. It's like really weird timeline, and that timeline impacts how the thing gets deployed and what gets researched and how it gets deployed in the world. So yeah, I don't think it's a really satisfying answer yet. But I think that's, I mean, let's actually try to find some examples in different places, whether it's like digital systems or non-digital systems. What are places where we thought there was some form of like general rule that nobody should be able to say like, oh, okay, like this is wrong, you know, like this is the classic computer science thing. You know, you get to the most general construction, and you're like, everybody should be able to agree with that, right? And then like things stem from that. And where are places where this failed? I think social network is a good example, right? Like when we get to a place where we have like the most general protocol, you know, that people should be able to agree about, turns out because of network effects of other things, it does not necessarily get as much like traction as the existing systems. So that's like a very basic one. Another one, I guess for that is like the censorship thing. Like maybe people do think that like civic discourse on the internet needs to be somewhat moderated, right? And so the most general protocol actually might might elicit reaction in a bunch of people, which is like, well, actually we don't want the most general protocol that like makes everything be like, like you could say, well, you can do post Elon X and add a Chrome extension that removes the things you don't like, but you don't see it this way. If that's what I mean, like the browser technically should be able to let you filter whatever you want on the client side, yet people don't do it. So uh, I think it's a really good question though, which is like, if it reminds me a little bit of like there was this work from this person at the Ethereum Foundation that worked on getting Ethereum to be recognized as halal from Muslim from Muslim scholars, because the thing with like there's a bunch of rules in that, like that makes it such that you cannot essentially lend money to someone for a system to be halal. So there's a bunch of like fintech systems and banks that are certified to be halal because they don't like actual interest in some, like I'm not that knowledgeable about it, but there was this very big question, which is like, is Ethereum halal? And can this group of people like use it essentially based on like their religion? And so I think that oftentimes like we're like this system is like as general as it could be, and everybody should be able to agree with it. And then it's like, actually it's not playing out the way we expected. So it's almost like, that's almost why I think that we should have like a marketplace of ideas instead of a totalizing thing. Like let people be able to experiment with different things and see where they end up at. And this doesn't mean I'm like, no, like super bearish Ethereum and like scaling with rollups and all of that. I just think that I had to go through exactly. I think there's I think there's a question. Like there's a question about like, is it truly a good thing that we have a super general system? And how general is it? Because if we look at it from the lens of engineering, it might be general. But if we look at it from like the lens of digital physics, is this a good thing that I can't take your ETH? I don't know. I don't know. And while you can always say, well, I can decide to put my ETH in a smart contract that allow you to take it, because like I like sign up to a place where like I'm exposed to some amount of quote unquote violence. I am not sure that this reaches the same. Like, it's like, would we have been able to collaborate as like a human civilization if we all started from a world we had like a perfect shell around us and a drip feeder, and we can always decide to protect ourselves from everybody else and just like eat and like survive? Like, what if we gotten to where we are at today if we had started from a place where we can like completely shut ourselves away from the world and essentially survive? And I don't know. It's hard to know, basically.
Well, I think that the meta point of all of this is becoming much more important as we kind of get closer to bits flipping atoms, and with, AI models that have had post training having the biases of people who trained them, the internet like being divided into these zones with like different biases. And like the more and more important the digital world becomes, the more important it is for us to figure out how to define these like physics. And like, it's kind of a new question. Like, people have been thinking about it, but the level of importance that it's starting to kind of like accrue is a new thing. So I guess my next question is, okay, so we're in where we are today, like we have like, and you've been building, mud and on-chain games. Is there some like bringing this down to earth, like making it much more practical? Is there a way in which this is a path that leads to these bigger questions, or how do you think about that? And I think you said something about, these systems don't have as much adoption as we would have hoped for, because they have this like very like strong opinion on you having to enter this like separate world from everything else. Like I kind of like I kind of feel like we're beyond the point where we can say that the user experience of these blockchain apps is what's preventing people from using them. Kind of recently, like maybe in the last 6 months to a year, but now we're at the point with wallets, with layer twos, where you can use them if there was something like good happening there. So yeah, what do you make of that? Do you think we need to start exploring like kind of categorically new ways of building these systems to make them interesting to real people?
Yeah. Um, and yeah, the answer is yes. I think so. I give this talk in Paris, I think a year ago, where like the title of the talk is um, the Ludens thesis, which is this idea that like in economics, you like a model usually referred to is homo economicus, which is like the perfectly rational kind of like economic actor, which is going to maximize their welfare basically through like rational decisions. And there's this book from this Dutch scholar on kind of like the culture of like play in society, which is called Homo Ludens. And he makes the case that like play or like essentially non-economic activity is like at the base of like essentially what makes us human and culture. Like you could not be like an economically rational agent and end in the place we're in today. And also like it is fundamentally incompatible with like your like biological wiring for like decision making essentially. Like when we say, oh, like if only people were more rational, they would not do that. Like what is actually hidden behind this statement is like people are not homo economicus, right? And I think that one thing that has happened over the course of how kind of like blockchain adoptions grew is that because money was the biggest possible statement one could make, it's like we build a system that has money in it. And this was a thing that was inaccessible even to the biggest tech companies out there and the most sophisticated systems. Like even that they couldn't get to. It's almost like, like the faraway dream of like, what's the last feature we can build? Like, we could get to like a currency that is recognized and interoperable. And I think that one of the things that happened with that is because of this path dependency I was talking about earlier, every single little bit of like incremental improvement that we made around it was always catering to this kind of like this like notion of like our users or homo economicus. And there are people like that. Like turns out there are people like that love doing that stuff, that love, like looking around, seeing the thing as a game, trying to maximize their economical welfare. And that I think has attracted that kind of people. And we've gone towards building for these kinds of users. And we had another narrative that like we kind of like told to ourselves, which is we're going to bank the unbanked, or like stable coins are going to be able to bring essentially like more stable currencies to countries with hyperinflation and all of that. And while this played out in some ways, the former is 99% of what's happening in many ways. Like this is like, at least in the, like, I know like there are other blockchains where this might be different, but if you look at the intellectual discourse and the people that have both power from a development perspective, like what kind of like code or essays they can write and how it's distributed to people and how like impactful it is, like this is most of like how we're thinking about it. A great example is when people started working on layer twos, the layer twos that won after the first like kind of iteration, which is, oh, we can do anything, is, well, actually, let's build layer twos for the kind of applications that we had on Ethereum layer one, which is mostly financial applications. And so there's this kind of like step we keep making, which is because we don't know what we should make, let's just make the current thing better, and we just keep going towards that. And I think it is a fair thing to do if you operate from the perspective of like, I want to figure out product market fit or protocol market fit from what I'm building. But the issue is that we won't be able to like quantum teleport to a different place, right? Where like actually Ethereum as a world computer like creates meaning and is important for a totally different class of people. So the assumption I've been working from is that I think genuinely that blockchain technologies give orthogonal affordances to video games and virtual worlds, like massively multiplayer virtual worlds. Like the kind of affordance it gives is very different from like, we're going to like migrate to Unreal Engine 6, or we're going to rewrite our server in C++ instead of Python. Like if you think about, like the unit vectors in linear algebra, like Ethereum gives a new unit vector, which is kind of what I was trying to capture in the autonomous world essay, which is like, no, the fact that the world can be made progressively autonomous, and also this like kind of like inherent composability that Ethereum has, enables people that build these worlds to shift away from wearing the director of mask of like, I am building essentially like Disneyland, to I am an emissary that is trying to get this world to exist and essentially like have it grow beyond like my control and my ownership. So the thing that is interesting with that is, if this thesis ends up being like leading to interesting products and interesting experiences that attracts a totally different type of folks, I think it will essentially give the step to blockchain, which goes, when you go from 1 to 2, you can start drawing a line. Whereas when you just have a point, it can just be like any form of plane. When we have 2 points, we're like, okay, the system is actually useful across a whole range of use cases. Because from an engineering perspective, we are convinced that this is a general system. Like, why wouldn't everybody put their system on top of Ethereum? But the reality is that it is really hard still to keep ourselves honest, even from a narrative perspective of what affordance Ethereum gives you, right? Like, what does this system give us? Because your narrative and like the narrative you both tell to yourself, to the rest of the world, co-evolves with what you're seeing, because you keep ingesting data like, oh, like Uniswap works and it's great, or like stable coins makes people in Argentina be able to like own like digital dollars. Like, you have to refine your narrative around the data you have. And as soon as we stay in this one point, it's basically pretty unstable, in my opinion. And so like kind of like the dream was like, well, I put in a pitch deck somewhere. If we can get 1 million people to love Ethereum and the world computer because it powers like a significant part of like what they care about and has nothing to do with like financialization, essentially it's a quantum leap of where we're at from a cultural perspective, right? So I do think, and I don't think it's like a lure. It's not like, oh, we're gonna rewire the servers from C++ to Ethereum and they're not gonna see it coming and like secretly they love Ethereum. Like, the point is you have to build something that enables uniquely new things, right? Because that otherwise you're gonna compete with everything else in many ways. So I'd say that this is kind of like a TLDR of the vision, which is like, I think not everybody is a homo economicus, but I think most people are homo ludens one way or another. And when I say ludens, I don't mean playing video games. Like just playing playful with your friend as you walk down the street and like you do a little bit of improv or you talk about something like interesting you've heard about. That's not like an economically rational thing. You should always try to convince your friend to give you money or to like work with you on your next business idea, right? If you're a homo economicus. So yeah, I'll stop there. But to kind of like summarize it, like the one sentence outcome I think we should aspire to is if we can essentially make the system from a cultural perspective be both like important and generative at a totally different place in the design space, we can start drawing a line. And then we're like, okay, this is what Ethereum is. We put another point, and we're like, we can start constructing the shape of what this system gives us, because I think that in many ways, saying it can do everything is a form of cope. It's like, oh yeah, it can do everything. And the reason we say it can do everything is because we don't know what it is. Like, I generally don't think we understand Ethereum. I think the people that built Ethereum, the people that work in Ethereum, we don't know what it is still. Like, we have some ideas, but if we cannot answer a question like, can Ethereum be good for XYZ, like, can it be good to like push this homo ludens thesis? It means we don't understand what it is at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. So maybe to say it back to you, there is this kind of inertia around the initial conditions of Ethereum starting with money, starting with this from Bitcoin, starting from this place that like no other application with its existing physics could reach, however kind of pervasive it was. That's the starting point we start from. And then, our collective, let's iterate on what's working, basically leads to the DeFi and all of the various contraptions that have been built, and
which are amazing. Like,
which are amazing.
Stablecoins is a gift from the universe. Like, it should not have been possible if you think
totally
about it, and it works. It's kind of insane.
Totally. And but we can, you have this deep sense that we are not all homo economicus, we're also homo ludens, and that we need to break out of this straitjacket of everything being about being iterations on like economics and on rational agents maximizing like an individual metric. And this also goes hand in hand with like exploring other technologies and other ways to like construct these like systems that can have these properties. And like that's kind of where you're orienting. Like how do we use Ethereum with, you know, the composability and the kind of like all these like other benefits that it gives us and other things together to get to this place where we have, you know, where we have digital physics that's not purely like rational agents interacting with each other.
Exactly. Under a libertarian framework where nobody can take your smart contracts.
Yeah, totally.
And I think it's a great experience. Like it's a great playing ground for that idea. Like I'm not saying, okay, let's take Ethereum, change its digital physics, and like coerce everybody into like operating under that. I think like starting from worlds is a way we can iterate over that in a way where like the nice thing with worlds is they're a little bit like art. They're self-standing. Even if they exist within an airlock, they can be appreciated for what they are, and people might want to essentially like inhabit them. And like, I mean, inhabiting in a non-skeuomorphic way, you don't literally like open the door and like, no, I'm living in the world of Ethereum, but there's some amount of like brain space you allocate to that world, right? At the end of the day.
What is the Emissary's Guide to Worlding?
The Emissary's Guide to Worlding is a book written by Ian Cheng. He wrote a hardcover version of this that sadly went out of print. He republished it as an ebook. The sad thing is the ebook is different from the physical copy. It actually doesn't have the same content at all. It's like a distilled version. It's available online. And I'll talk a little bit about Ian and his work and kind of like what I find really interesting about Emissary's Guide to Worlding. But to put it into context, Emissary's Guide to Worlding is a book I read right before I wrote the Autonomous World blog post. And it was really inspiring to me. It was inspiring because Ian, I think, did the best job so far I've seen online or like on a book to express this idea that creating a system is not like it's not like one lens. It's not like, oh, creating a system as an engineer is creating a set of rules and then letting people do whatever on top. Or like creating a system as like a director. I mean, he calls these system worlds, but I'm an engineer. I call them systems. Let's say worlds. For him, like he has these 4 different masks that you can wear when you think about worlds. One is the director, which is you essentially lay down what the world is and you let people interface with the world. But at the end of the day, you have a vision for how the story of the world should unfold. So like usually when we talk about, like intellectual property, things like Disney, Marvel, J.K. Rowling and all of that, what this is very much people or groups of people wearing the director mask and bringing people along for the ride in their world. Ian also has the mask of like the hacker, which is let's look at technology, assemble it in a way that gets like some form of system to like generate interesting things, which is really like if you're an engineer, when you say, I'm going to build a cool system, this is what mask you're wearing if you do worlding, if you think about the world. Like a cool open source library that gets people to build things you didn't expect is a form of worlding if you wear the hacker mask, right? And then he has this third mask, which I've always found a little bit challenging to kind of like really intuit, which is the cartoonist mask. And the cartoonist mask is basically the idea that like the cartoonist tries to distill a world into its purest components to reflect things about either like the human condition or like kind of like the history of a group you're interested in targeting. It's or like reaching out to. It's this idea that like the cartoonist believes that there's like very simple stories and primitives that can be like instantiated via this world. And this is the mask I think this is the mask I have the least intuition for. And essentially, Ian says most artistic practice lends to either of these 3 masks, but he believes there's a 4th quadrant. There's always a 4th quadrant. Like if you draw a 2x2 matrix, like there's these 3 things, but there's the 4th thing that people are not thinking about. And his 4th quadrant is the emissary. And what the emissary is, if you wear the emissary mask, you can essentially like fluidly navigate between cartoonist, hacker, and director in order to have as an ultimate goal to get a world to grow beyond its initial condition, its initial creator, its initial rule set, and its initial values, right? Like, and this is what he thinks is the most kind of like complete form of art. That's what he has been trying to like instantiate via his practice. Ian does a lot of stuff with simulation. So the way he got to Emissary's Guide to Worlding is he started essentially like creating these simulations in Unity of like worlds. Like he did a bunch of like AI research stuff and art, and then he would let these simulations like kind of like evolve and then make movies out of them, or like get artifacts from that simulation. And as he was working in his practice, he would like come back to this idea of like, I'm actually like, I do way better when I'm not trying to get this work to go to a specific place. Like there's just like much more interesting stories that unfold for me and my studio as we work on this project, when we're not approaching it from the perspective of like, oh, we're going to like build the coolest engineering system, or, oh, we have a specific story we're trying to tell, or we have specific values we're trying to embody within this world. And so I think that's how we like progressively iterated to the concept of Emissary. I think it would be cool if he went on your podcast for you two to talk about it, because I think that, I mean, I'm just a fan of his work, and I don't have authority over like, here's how he was able to play it out. But yeah, Jan is super cool. And I think Emissary's Guide to Worlding, the other thing that got me thinking, wow, this book is very like, it reflects reality pretty correctly, is he has this extremely good example of emissaries. And one thing that shocked me is he has Vitalik as an example of an emissary. He talks about it. And I was like, oh, like that's true.
That's true.
That's true, right? I was like, wow, that really kind of like that like leveled up. Like I was like, after reading this particular paragraph in the book, I thought, he has a very good understanding of this. So yeah, that's Emissary's Guide to Worlding. I hope, like I would really like, and I've asked him and I've asked the people that published this book, I think we need a new hardcover version, or like at least a paper version, because I want to be able to gift it to people. But yeah, I recommend everybody to check it out. It's online on World to Live, so world2.live, and that's the ebook version is there.
Amazing. Yeah, I was reading your old blog post and stumbled onto it last night and read like 10 pages, and I was like, wow, this is incredible. So I got fully nerd sniped. I think it's my weekend reading. Yeah. One last question, maybe like more of a personal fun thing, is in my kind of stumbling through your past and things that you've written, I saw this yeah, you have a checkered past, my friend. No, just kidding. You have this blog post from a few years ago, which is like, read weird books, right? And I feel like even this conversation kind of is like a result of that, where you were talking about this book, you're talking about Homo Ludens, and basically in there you're arguing for don't, like, if you want to have a differentiated model of the world, if you want to have interesting ideas, stop consuming the same information as everyone else. How what does that look like in practice for you, and has that kind of evolved over the years?
Yeah, I think, and I'm not the first person to say this. I think like generally when people talk about creativity, they will tell you that what creativity is to be able to like make connections that others didn't see. Like you never create from nothing. It's basically impossible to create from nothing. And so by extending your range of input, you can create new things that essentially like people where others were not able to draw the connection. I think what I really kind of like when I was in that phase where I wrote the blog post is I started getting a lot of value from trying to find different like basis vectors that like just that, and then within these basis vectors really look for either obscure or controversial sources essentially. So a great example I give to people is there's this book from a psychologist, and the name of the book is, I hope I'm not going to butcher it because it's a big sentence, but it is The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. I think this is the name of the book, by Julian Jaynes. And Julian Jaynes essentially argues that 3,000 years ago we were not conscious, that the gods is essentially our two hemispheres not being essentially like integrated well enough, and that one part was talking to the other one. And so when you read things like the Iliad and all of these stories, when the characters like, the god told me to do X, like Athena came down and told me to like shoot an arrow or whatever, what this actually means is like their hemispheres were like not integrated enough to recognize this as coming from themselves. And then he starts from this and essentially like rewrites the history of the world and of things like poetry and schizophrenia and culture from that assumption. And this book got totally trashed when it came out, of course, because like people were it's just like completely rejected in psychology. But one thing I found really interesting is, regardless of whether you think that the theory is true, right? Like it just gets you to think differently. The same way, like I think you'll find on Hacker News is like people will tell you, oh, learning to write in a functional programming language will make you better at writing an imperative language because you just think differently. And that is just a very general statement about like thinking. And so the switch I made is like, I'm not trying to find information that will be true. Or like, I'm not going to try to find information that will give me a better model of the world as is, as like I take the thing and I apply it to the world and I have like better understanding or control over the world. It's more like I'm trying to find things that will shake my understanding sufficiently such that I'm either curious about new stuff or I like reform some of my understanding or I draw connections that were not there before. So this is really kind of like the flip that happened in my mind, because when I when I was like 17, 18, I really wanted to ingest as much as possible in order to know, to be able to do better. But the switch I made is, it's not like, yes, you should for sure learn things that like give you knowledge, but you should also like read things that are not necessarily true in order to be able to like kind of like shake your understanding a little bit and go on different like wild tangents that you would not have gone otherwise. The thing that it requires though is you really need to you need to essentially understand the thing that has been written in the context of who wrote it. And that's another thing that like I think is not really taught very much. Like most of them, you read the book, you're like, oh, this is from this author, whatever I read this week is their Wikipedia page. You really need to understand the context in which it was written, because that actually gives you the human contact with the author in order to not take the ideas as like this was given from God and this is the truth. You know, it's like someone like me wrote this book like 100 years ago, and they were probably confused and lost, but there is some good stuff there, right?
So you kind of, to do that, you go and kind of like inhabit the kind of like world that this person would live in. You read around what they're reading, their
I usually read everything
contemporaries.
they wrote. Like that's a thing I usually do. Like if I find someone I really like, I read everything they wrote and I try to find the contemporaries. It's very similar to like if you go on tech Twitter today, everybody has a blog, you know, and you're like, oh, I wonder what Sam Altman is reading and who he's talking to it, and you read about that. You can do the same for like different periods of time. Exactly. Yeah. The sources are not as good, but it's really interesting. Because then also you start realizing the politics of the ideas. Like one thing that also another fascinating rabbit hole is if you go see like who the students of Freud were, like Freud had a bunch of different students and they all disagreed with each other and they went into wild directions when it comes to psychology and psychiatry. But only some of them really won. And then we like kind of like took this as canon and we're like, oh, okay, this is Freudian psychiatry. And then there's Carl Jung, and Carl Jung is like, you know, like he carried over the torch from Freud. But the other people had pretty interesting ideas as well. And I think that discourse really was regenerative. So you also want to co-mine that discourse by like trying to find what they wrote and like contextualizing with the other people. One last thing I'll say, because I think we're like really deep in the tangent now, we should probably wrap it up, is that another secret that I think is very, like you have to build it for yourself, is finding a system by which you can inject randomness into your own thinking, because otherwise you get stuck, right? Like, because it's very pervasive. It's like both what you think is correct, what you write, what you read, where you find your information, who you talk to, which are going to recommend you things that fit within your worldview. And so you essentially need to do creative destruction within your opinions, because otherwise you're going to start essentially doing like more and more you get gradient descent steps till like, I found perfectly the kind of people that agree with me all the time and all the things. And you know, and sometimes you'll play at disagreeing with each other. I found myself doing that. I'm like, well, I have such a good group of friends with whom I have great conversation. And then I looked at it, it was like, we just play at disagreeing with each other because actually we're really comfortable in the assumptions we have while we have these conversations, right? So, and I think this is like, you can never get too good at this. It's really, you can really keep going because the world is way more heterogeneous than you think from an intellectual perspective.
One more thing on this that I've been playing with recently is I'm curious how you go about understanding and processing and like working through materials. And I say this with a kind of shift that I'm playing with is I think for a long time I was in this mode of, I experienced reading a lot of books and then basically just being a leaky bucket and forgetting everything I read. And so I kind of went to the other side of the pendulum and I was like, okay, I got to take notes. I got to and I think there's something really important in that, which is rather than take notes, you can react to what you're reading and like think through it. But a kind of like new thing that I'm starting to do is to actually trust my unconscious mind more and to allow it to synthesize however it's going to, and to just like consume, to just like bring in all of this information and let the non-deterministic, like chaotic way in which it does that play out. I'm curious how you do this.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So if we go to the implementation, I don't take notes. I very rarely I can't even keep like Goodreads list up to date. It's just like, it's very chaotic. But one thing I do though is that first thing, if I'm not inspired by something, I immediately stop. Because otherwise you get into this vicious loop of like, you want to get all the way till the end of something and that gets you to actually like consume less. So that's one. The other thing is I really try to do the thing I talked about earlier, which is like, okay, I read a book and now I'm going to try to find like other, like either like sources or even types of documents, whether it's like different modalities, like videos, letters, whatever, around that. And I start like, my brain just constructs a map of what's going on. Like I read a book about Julian Jaynes, and then the first thing I'll do is like, okay, where did he go to school? Like what class did he take? And like who was around when you wrote that book? What did the critics say about this? And then you start building a map. And that's where I think that, because I had the same problem, the leaky bucket stuff, where you read a book, but if you do it in a way where like, first, you have not made that flip, which is like, books are not about truth, they're about ways of thinking. And so if you've not made that switch, you read it and you're like, cool, I learned some new things today. It's all correct. Like, first you have to make that switch. You're like, oh, okay, interesting that you're thinking this way. That's the first switch. And then it's like, I wonder what got you to think this way. Almost from like an anthropological perspective. Like, what are the kind of like conditions that got you to think this way? And that really kind of like helped build better mental models around this. But I think that ultimately you're right, which is that the unconscious is going to drive like the power law of understanding. And you can add like a few percent if you like really grind, like I'm going to write notes and write stuff in Notion and Rome, and it's all going to be beautifully organized. Like you can get a few more percent there. The same way you can work harder by sleeping less, but it's not going to put you on the power law. Like in order to access the power law, you really need to like tap into the big parallel computer you don't have access to and just like see what it does. And it's fundamentally emotional also. Like if you do not feel something reading the source, and the way you get yourself to feel something is either because in relation with other sources, or like if you read about a drama between two people intellectually, you have some amount of side you're going to like intuitively take. If you don't tap into this kind of like emotional memory, it just comes from one ear and lives from the other, because it doesn't get to like the unconscious in many, I think. But I mean, you should treat all of these statements like something you read on Reddit. I don't.
Yeah. Working hypothesis. But I really like this point about emotion of like, also it's like just seeing ourselves as these, we're these multi-dimensional beings, right? We're not like strict, like analytical, discursive processes. This also ties into the whole homo ludens thing.
We're not Economicus. Like that's the thing. We're not. So yeah. Maybe reading, like maybe reading books like an Economicus is also the fair case. It's just so pervasive. It's everywhere.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, this has been so much fun.
Yeah, thanks, Ina.
Hey, I'm going to make a small ask here. If you've been listening to these conversations and want to support what we're doing here, I would really, really appreciate if you could leave a rating and a review for the podcast wherever you're listening to it. This might seem like a small thing, but it will really help other people also discover the show. Thank you. I'm grateful to be able to do this and look forward to being here together again soon.